Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, a series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a painter, and like many successful painters, her work has been exhibited in galleries around the world and is part of private and public collections in India, Europe, Japan, and the museums and galleries in many parts of the world. But what distinguishes her is her unique commitment and a combination of both the personal vision and articulation and the public art. To many, she is regarded in the tradition, the lineage, as it were, of Amrita Shergill, the legend. But my guest is emerging as somewhat of a legend in her own right. I'm delighted to welcome Arpana Caur.
Thank you, Rajiv, for those wonderful compliments. Thank
My
you.
goodness. Well, it's. I think that you have embodied in a contemporary world of painting a deep sense of introversion, introspection, a private artist in many ways, and yet you have engaged in many public works. Do you see yourself in what role do you see yourself as someone engaging in the processes of art for yourself personally, which is really the image that I've traditionally had of you and your work, and making these forays out recently? We haven't traditionally associated you with the more sort of, how do I put it, the publicity-seeking aspect of the art world. It's very much someone who's engaging in your own processes. What is your self-perception?
Well, I think the introverted part is a pain for me. It's something I've been trying to overcome unsuccessfully for many, many years and see myself improving just a little. But the introverted nature of one's temperament is, to my mind, something I've had to combat with. And, because at a certain point of your life, you are called upon to move also in more public spheres, and then you have to combat that. And I feel that I'm much better now than I was many years ago, when I used to have a permanent chair in the bathroom, and if any visitor came into the house, which was very rarely, I would have this retreat and a book, and I'd wait for sounds of the visitor to leave and come out. And I'm still intensely private. I have a recording machine, for instance, and just hear messages twice or thrice a day. And the contradiction is that the work is about people. But I live in a city like Delhi, which has become very active and can really have a great weight upon you if you were not to shut yourself up to do your creative work. Because painting, unlike the kind of work that you do, is a very private thing, and when you are sitting in front of the canvas, you're like a monk, and it's just you and the canvas, and even the rustle of somebody opening an envelope or listening to a phone call could disturb you. So it's an intensely private activity. What happens to painting after it's done is not in your hands, because then the galleries take over. The necessity of having occasional shows, although I show once in 5 years, even in Delhi, takes over, and other paraphernalia to do with painting. For instance, there's somebody coming from Meerut tomorrow for a dissertation, somebody coming from Aligarh next week for a dissertation. So these activities take over once the painting act is over. But for that act, you have to give the best part of your day. And then you have to shut yourself up and be inaccessible to the world, which I managed to do very successfully by lying by this wonderful instrument called a recording machine. And the aspect of exhibiting is when you are out in the open and totally vulnerable, because when a painter is exhibiting, then you're totally, your thoughts, your feelings are there for all to see. And that's a moment you have to face from time to time. how I have balanced it was having the shows at very long intervals in between. The public art, which we've just talked about, is out of a feeling that very few people come into galleries to look at
I should just
painting.
explain that the public art is that you have done created murals in public spaces in Delhi, in Germany, and this is really taking art out of the galleries into the public sphere, where it's both accessible and viewable, not just by people who formally seek out art, but as a part of the landscape. And that's a sort of new area that you have been reaching out to.
In fact, that's an area that I foraged into 21 years ago when I did 2 murals for the India International Trade Fair in Delhi. But because paintings weren't selling, and in those days Delhi had, in the 70s, 2 galleries, Benimal and Sridharani or IFX, which you could rent out, or Rabindra Bhavan, but private galleries there were only 2. So what did artists do for a living? They either taught or they sought public work of the kind the trade fairs offered. People like Narayan Kulkarni, K.S. Kulkarni, and so many other artists would send in tenders. And I also sent in tenders for Goa and Himachal in 1980 just to make some money. And I worked on site for 2 months and produced these 2 pavilions, which were temporary.
How does a piece of art like that, which is a collaborative enterprise, emerge? Your work is so intensely personal. And how do you go and work with someone else to create a new totality? It's 2 different minds operating. Do you plan it in advance? It sort of evolves as it goes along? Do you do little bits and segments? How do you make this mesh?
It's a much more difficult exercise and therefore challenging. Everybody wants to get out of what they've been doing normally. Although I love the solitude of my studio, but there are times when you want to try uncharted territory, which is this kind of collaborative work. And I embarked on this about 7 years back with a folk artist called Satnarayan Pandey from Bihar, who is a Godna painter. Godna was totally unknown. It means tattoo, and tattoo is always done on the body, and black and white tattoo painting from the Madhubani district. Madhubani is very well known. It's flamboyant and loud, but Godna is very subtle and black and white. And when paper went to this part of Bihar 10 years back, the Godna artists felt that it's a chance of making a little bit of money, although the money is hardly there. But they felt, okay, let's explore a market. So they began to coat cow dung with water and coating the paper and doing the black and white drawings on it. So this Godna painting was completely unknown till I chanced upon this artist sitting on a pavement near Delhi Heart. He hadn't got a place in Delhi Heart. He'd never got access to the Crafts Museum. So I said to myself that we live in 2 times and 2 cultures simultaneously. And there's a thermal power station behind my house where all the women of Shahpur Jat village dry thousands of dung cakes every day on its steel walls. And I go to an ashram in Ghaziabad every week where I see the most strange sights of, say, a bullock cart carrying the upper body of a truck on the Delhi-Ghaziabad highway. And I thought how to show these 2 coexistences in a painting would be to collaborate with a folk artist. Now, nobody had ever co-signed with a folk artist. I mean, they are respected in their own way, but they don't sign their work because in India we never had this tradition of signing, like Ajanta, Ellora, or even the miniatures are all unsigned. So the tradition of the anonymity, the dedicated artist, individuality is a very 20th century phenomena. So Pandey also used to never sign his paintings. So when I started working with him, so I requested him to do rows of horses in our first collaborative work, which were horizontal. And I juxtaposed that with the vertical line of cars in all these fluorescent garish colors that cars come in, and we called it so many horsepower. So I was very thrilled with the outcome of this horizontal linear tension and the horse car tension. And I mean, it was very naive and simplistic, but it was the reality of our times. Similarly, I made him do trees and leave space for me to do a garden or chairs and we called it the same wood, because from the same innocent tree is coming the chair, which now in Delhi especially we know what the chair means, kissa kursi ka. So I had this row of very uncertain chairs parallel to the trunk of the tree in fluorescent colors again, and the fact that his work was black and white gave me a chance to juxtapose my loud, primary colors, which I'm very fond of using. And the gun again comes from the same wood. So this whole thing of violence, nature being used for fashioning a weapon to kill.
The quality too of your painting in terms of the women in your paintings, there is sort of almost a diminished sexuality, or there isn't a focus on that aspect of it. Men are almost sort of marginal in the canvas. How do you look at, what are your notions of feminism?
Firstly, I don't regard myself as a feminist or any ist or any ism, because I find straight jackets very confining. But in the beginning, when I began to show in 74, things were different for women, and one was growing up. As a teenager, painting was a way of exploring self-identity. Who am I? What's my role in life? What gives me happiness? What am I to follow? These were questions one had to discover, and I chose to discover them through painting. Therefore, the autobiographical element, and I did a lot of works called Women in Interiors, and often the women in interiors were juxtaposed with a male kite flyer who has all the freedom to move around in. This was the 70s. But slowly, as you're surer of your identity, I think it was some very great writer, Hindi writer, I can't recollect her name, who said, it's not me who creates the writing, it's writing that creates me. So in the case of creative people, I think musicians, you must be experiencing it yourself, that it's your work which fashions you, chisels you day by day. And the autobiographical element, which was a necessity in those days of exploration of identity, once one was on surer ground as a person, as an artist, so one became aware of the world and universal issues like, say, environment or even spiritualism. Although in these cynical times one uses that word with great hesitation, because even the word Sufi has become so fashionable in Delhi these days, and I find it so skin deep now. So I'm afraid to use that word, although I was brought up with this whole tradition of Bulle Shah and Farid and Kabir, and did a whole series on Kabir also, Body is Just a Garment. But one is afraid now of using that word.
To what degree is this sort of the external analysis of art critics and reviewers and writers about you a pressure, a liability in some ways? You're analyzed, you're dissected, you're applauded. She's working in the lineage of Amrita Shergill. She's emerging as a legend. The whole range of things that people say about your work, which in a sense, for someone who responds to your work, is more, how do I put it, more a hindrance, because you go to it with this baggage.
Yeah,
so I just wondered how much of a baggage the painter considers this herself.
The only thing that bothers me is being labeled as a feminist, which I'm not. I think I'm a humanist primarily. And as I said, though I still paint a lot of women in the paintings, there have been areas that have been left untouched by people who look at the work, like a whole series of bowls that I did, or this kind of quest we were talking of, which one is hesitant to label as. Use a lot of Buddhas in my work, and Kabir, I've done a whole series. So I feel the weightage has been more towards the women aspect, rather than, say, works. I've been painting environmental issues for 11, 12 years. I think it's easier for people to just label you as one thing, and then a woman painter is expected to paint. Like women writers are expected to have certain sentimental issues regarding to women as their core theme. Rather than being citizens of the world, regarding the Amrita Shergill question, I feel very proud because she's one of my ideals, so much so that I wanted to call myself Amrita when I was a child. And my mother, she had a sort of distaste for the prosaic Sikh names. So she never wanted to give me a name. I had an absurd name till I chose my own name at 15.
So
And I
what was
wanted
this absurd name?
well, that shall not be revealed. So at the age of 15, I thought of Amrita. And I was in Simla at that time, my last school, and I wrote to her that I did the ring between Amrita and Arpana, because Amrita, I mean, it's such a cross to bear, and it's too great, and who the hell am I to name myself after her? So I eventually, out of that self-consciousness of that great historical burden, I chose Arpana instead. I thought it would be a lesser burden to carry. So that's the story of the Amrita.
You were a student of literature in college, and you're a self-taught painter. What does it mean to be a self-taught painter? You just pick up a canvas, buy some paint, and try and figure it out?
I think it's a matter of, painting is not just an act of applying paint on canvas. It's a whole philosophy of life, or there's this flat surface in which you have to create a vision. And I was never ever confident I'd ever make it as a professional painter. I knew of none in my immediate surroundings. So I thought, let me do literature, teach, and do painting as a hobby. But while at college, this ad came out that Hussain was selecting some young artists for a big show, and that's how I entered this field professionally. And at that time, there was very little by way of professional, so it was a long road, a long struggle. But I was deeply attracted to our tradition of painting and sculpture. And the very first painting that I ever sold in my life, I bought an art book. And even now I give myself that present, with the result that I have a wonderful library of art books, and especially of miniatures, and I keep going through them thousands of times without getting tired. I take a lot of elements from our miniature painting. There was a whole phase when I took a lot of architectural elements from 1980 to 85. Then after the riots, the series that I did took a lot of external elements of nature, setting the human tragedy against the vast backdrop of nature.
You're referring to the Sikh riots?
Yeah, that's right, the 84 riots, yeah. So all these elements of nature, the setting of the small human tragedy against the vast backdrop of nature, and how nature continues. It was a series called World Goes On, which was shown here in Al-Qazi's gallery in 85, and then in Bombay and Calcutta. So all that was taken from the miniatures, which is from my vast collection of books. And even now, I look at these books all the time and get a lot of inspiration from them, though my issues are always contemporary. And I think that's what this learning process has been, from one's own tradition rather than any Western imposed art education.
Obviously, sort of two aspects to art, and one is a sort of the craftswoman aspect, where you learn technique so that you're able to express as accurately and vividly as you can the internal visualizing and that process. How did you sort of acquire the craftsmanship of painting self-taught?
For instance, if you need, there's one painting which was with Kushwan, women reading a newspaper. So that was done in 79, and a window open, and how a woman is trying to read the world. And I made my mother hold a newspaper and I would draw her. Basically, it's riyaz, so constant drawing. If you're sitting on a chair, somebody's reading in the house, somebody's playing the violin, and constantly drawing. It's a constant element of riyaz. Then looking at your own tradition and the way the miniatures or our sculpture has taken liberties with the human figure, which Western art never dared to do. So we have taken certain liberties with the human figure that I learned from, or say the element of repetition in Buddhist painting, which gives a sense of ongoingness. So these are, if you open your eyes and mind, there's so many things that you can learn from, and I feel that one lifetime is too short to implement all that one's absorbing and learning all the time, and I wish I had 10 lives.
Well, as someone who's sort of not even remotely an artist, you're always sort of envious, I am, of people's ability to be able to work with form, color, shape, and to create these visions. And you always wonder, what is it that I lack? How can I make this happen? How can I translate sort of these intangible, sometimes incomprehensible urgings, tingling sensations in the body, anguish of the mind, sort of translate that into paper? So it's, or canvas or a mural. So it's always interesting to sort of try and get a sense of what is this process that starts from somewhere in the recesses of the mind and then becomes a concrete reality.
That's a wonderful, warm question, and it's wonderful to hear. Nobody's ever asked me in an interview. But painting is an intoxication, like all the creative arts must be. So you start it because it gives you immense pleasure, and you start playing with forms and colors. And in my case, I somehow feel that it's some unconscious thirst left over from previous births. Some unquenchable thirst that leads you to this path, and that leads you on and on from one work to the other. Because in terms of say material or the other aspects that creative work brings, my cup has been full for a long time. Then what is that thirst, that undefinable thirst? Surely it's some residue which of some unconscious thing that one's not aware of. But it's also, color is a very intoxicating factor. And the way people get their kick out of this evening drink, people like us, we have to start our day with color. With color. So it's just a personal necessity. And it becomes an individual language if you're lucky, because so many embark on this personal necessity. This thirst is so many people's. If you have some kind of support to begin with in your most difficult years, some moral, psychological, more important financial support from a parent, you can go on. Otherwise you're finished. You just dry up and wither. So
obviously there's a balance, because frequently we associate great art with great suffering. Why is that?
The suffering, remains, because this thirst is unquenchable. No amount of work that you've produced or rewards it may bring can quench it, because you feel, oh my God, your time is running out. You have so many images in your head, and there's so much to say. The rewards of it are, it's great freedom. You're not painting for a market. You're not.
Well, you're not, but I think a great deal of art is painting for a market.
Yes, it's again necessity of the individual artist that he may churn out work, because now there's a great market for a great number of artists. We know that. But while you're in the solitude of your studio, the word exhibition or market does not come to your mind. It's akin to the most spiritual of experiences. So it's only later that the other paraphernalia, as I said earlier, take over.
You mentioned this aspect, spiritual, a number of times in our conversation. Is it that our tradition of art, because historically has been spiritual and motivated by the religious imperative, has been more imitative and replicating than it has been an expression of one's inner urgings, anguish, striving, fulfillment?
I don't know, art I've always seen as a spiritual exercise, whether it was a sculptor's 2nd century BC, the Yakshis, or a Janta Ellora, or the miniatures. I think that it was always, otherwise why would one choose it when there's so many other paths to choose from? Why would one choose it? Because of this inner necessity or a gift given by God, that you're an instrument in His hands. So you're doing things as a medium, as an instrument. You know, when I did this Hamburg mural, which is a 5-story high building, I have a great fear of heights, and I was up there on the scaffolding, not daring to look down, and all through the experience of painting it, having completed it, I thought it was not me. I mean, I didn't realize how it got done, and it was a lot of hard work. I was up there from morning till night, but it was, one really felt like an instrument. And you, firstly to begin with, you just felt like you're putting a stamp of India on a German wall. That was the main motive of going there, that here's a public space where thousands pass. It's a shopping complex in Hamburg, and thousands of people are going to see this predominantly Indian work, because Vinke let me have my way. The predominant motif in it is the Varli spiral from the folk art in Maharashtra of the continuous dance of life. And it's the Eastern concept of time, a goddess, a lotus, a pot full of water, pot being a metaphor for the body, all these rounded objects juxtaposed with the linear scale and compass that Zwinke painted. So firstly, the necessity was of just putting a stamp of your culture. And this wall, I'm told, is going to last at least 20 years.
You've believed in the cycles of life and rebirth and the many landmarks as you look back on your work and on your life. But when you sort of look ahead, are there sort of signposts, landmarks that you're reaching out to or striving to, or have you been able to achieve total surrender to the processes of life?
Surrender to the process, total surrender. I don't think much ahead. I don't know what the next day will bring. So I like living from day to day. And every day in the morning, it's a fresh new birth, because you know you're tackling this area in your canvas. Like today before the interview, I'm working on a series called Soni, from the Soni Mahiwal series. So I was trying to tackle a net that Mahiwal is casting upon Soni, and she's sitting like this, calm in the water, and he's casting this net, and that's what. So every day brings its surprises. How to handle that net without making it literal, you know, because that's the danger also, that things should not become too literal when you're saying something, because painting has its own language, and the mystery must remain in the work. Not everything should be
as it must in life. Arpana, Caur, thank you very much. That we were delighted that we managed to penetrate the answering machine and that you've been here with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajiv. Such a pleasure and a privilege for me, believe me.
Thank you. Well, it's. I think that you have embodied in a contemporary world of painting a deep sense of introversion, introspection, a private artist in many ways, and yet you have engaged in many public works. Do you see yourself in what role? Do you see yourself as someone engaging in the processes of art for yourself personally, which is really the image that I've traditionally had of you and your work, and making these forays out? Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, a series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a painter, and like many recently, we haven't traditionally associated you with the more sort of, how do I put it, the publicity-seeking aspect of the art world. It's very much someone who's engaging in your own processes. What is your self-perception?
Well, I think the introverted part is a pain for me. It's something I've been trying to overcome unsuccessfully for many, many years and see myself improving just a little. But the introverted nature of one's temperament is, to my mind, something I've had to combat with. And, because at a certain point of your life, you are called upon to move also in more public spheres, and then you have to combat that. And I feel that I'm much better now than I was many years ago, when I used to have a permanent chair in the bathroom. And if any visitor came into the house, which was very rarely, I would have this retreat and a book, and I'd wait for sounds of the visitor to leave and come out. And I'm still intensely private. I have a recording machine, for instance, and just hear messages twice or thrice a day. And
successful painters, her work has been exhibited in galleries around the world and is part of private and public collections in India, Europe, Japan, and the museums and galleries in many parts of the world. But what distinguishes her is her unique commitment and a combination of both the personal vision and articulation and the public art. To many, she is regarded in the tradition, the lineage, as it were, of Amrita Shergill, the legend. But my guest is emerging as somewhat of a legend in her own right. I'm delighted to welcome Arpana Caur.
Thank you, Rajiv, for those wonderful compliments. Thank you.